Okay, can you hear her back there?
Yes.
I love that story, the story. It's sad but true. Gee, Christmas. Thank all of you for coming out on a hot July night. I appreciate it. Maybe you just stepped in for a little cool place to cool off and get some food, but I still appreciate your being here. I think the Grapevine Historical Society is the only local historical society I know about. It meets monthly, year-round. Tarrant County Historical Society doesn't. I don't think Dallas County Historical Society does. And I don't think there's any such thing as the Keller, Crowley, Hearst, Lewis, Bedford, Colleyville Historical Society. So you guys are a rare exception. And I appreciate your inviting me out to speak on a favorite topic. I asked Tommy for a glass of water, or a cup of water, and he brought me this, which I think is finally the $5 bottle of water. This is fabulous. It's not just water. I know y'all want to know this because this is definitely your water at Grapevine. This is core hydration. It's perfectly pH balanced, and purified. So I'm already feeling pumped. I may do a few laps on the ring before I start talking to you. Anyway, I'm going to talk a little and answer any questions if you got questions. And when we get through, I'll be back in the back at the book table. And I always say looking is free. If you want to come back and look, you got a question, I'll try to answer them. If you want to do a good deed for poor Tommy, Tommy did say any books that you didn't buy, he'd carry back to the car. So, if you like Tommy, you might want to keep that in mind. Okay, let's get this. Okay. Going back to your points, how many of you remember when you used to get your newspaper on the front porch? Most of the time. Okay. Did you get the morning and the evening edition?
No.
Anybody get the morning and the evening?
Yeah, we're morning.
You must did that. I don't know about people in Grapevine, but if I was a forward volumes, did you get the Star Telegram and the press?
I think the Dallas.
You got somewhere here.
And the Times Herald.
No, I got.
Okay. Well, those of you who know what the hell is a press, it's not a line press or whatever. Fort Worth used to have two daily newspapers, the Fort Worth Star Telegram and the Fort Worth Press. And in the case of my father and mother, they got the morning edition of the Star Telegram and the evening edition of the Fort Worth Press. And you're going, what's the difference? The Star Telegram, I didn't figure out until many years later, prided itself on doing national news, regional news, the big stories. If you wanted to read about the dirt in Fort Worth and who got murdered and who was fooling around, you read the press. The press was more of a tabloid kind of newspaper. And the press has finally been digitized, for those of us that do research in newspapers, the press has finally been digitized up to, I think, 1940 something or other. And when I'm doing research, I'll look in the old newspapers and start telling, if you go to newspapers.com, if you're a researcher, you can do Star Telegram, Dallas Morning News, all the newspapers. And I check that, and then if I want to know the skinny, the dirty, then I go to the Fort Worth Press and see if I can find the story in there. So that's always good. And while we're on the subject, students, remember how you used to pay for your newspaper?
We used to have punch cards. We would punch whenever people paid weekly, we'd go by and pick up. Every week we'd go by the house, they'd pay us and we punched the little card. So they paid you.
You all were more advanced in the Star Telegram and Press delivery boys. Anybody else remember how you used to pay?
It's just an envelope.
I used
And-
Credit card.
In the Selcer family in Fort Worth, the paper boy
Yeah.
came around at the end of the month to collect.
Well,
Who did?
The paper boy, the newspaper boy.
We used to go by weekly.
You used to go quickly. We were more honest in Fort Worth.
Oh,
He came around at the end of the month to collect. And don't you see that? All sorts of assumptions. Number one, the fact that you're going to answer the door of your home. Number two, you've got the money to pay. And of course, the payment monthly back in the old days was, I don't know, $15, $20, that whatever it was. It was cheap. And obviously, if you weren't home, you and your parents were they, then the fellow, the paper boy, as we called him, never a paper girl, a paper boy, you had to come out of it. But that was how the newspaper was paid for. And obviously, times have changed greatly. You all know about the Wall Street Journal and the Dallas Morning News. You mentioned the Star Telegram. And somewhere, Eamon Carter is rolling over his grave at the Star Telegram today. It's very thin and getting thinner. And hardly anybody takes an actual newspaper anymore. Because, as I'm kind of rambling on, but it's all about, we are a certain generation of age when we used to read the newspapers and get our information from newspapers. And you didn't depend on social media. You didn't depend on Uncle Fred and Aunt Mary to tell you what they heard on Fox News or MSN now to tell you what they heard last night, so you didn't have to do it yourself. So you tuned in to remember CBS, ABC, NBC. So anyway, but the newspaper, the case of Star Telegram, it's delivered online at a higher price, but if you want to get your newspaper delivered to your home, like the old days, it's $500, $600, whatever dollars for a home delivery. And home delivery today, which I I'm rambling on, but I'll get to rant this for a second. But home delivery for the Star Telegram today means that the post office delivers it in your mailbox. So guess what? If it's a holiday and the post office is closed, you don't get your newspaper. You may get two the next day. But it's delivered that way, and the reason for that, and again, this is to think about. When you talk to your grandkids and your great-grandkids and the kids at the teach school, and they like, you were talking about, wonder what's that thing you're reading in the paper? The reason is in the old days, when you could get a newspaper subscription for $15 a month or whatever, $20, whatever it was, what paid for the paper was the revenue from the commerce, from the advertising. And as nobody advertises on newspapers anymore, what pays for your newspaper is what you and me and subscribers pay. So that's why the price is, even for digitized or digital online, is unbelievable now. And that's just part of it. The other thing is, if you remember back at the Dallas Morning News, it used to be if you had a problem, my father, this is all old stuff, okay? My father, if the newspaper went on the damn porch by 5:30 in the morning, my father called the newspaper.
Yep.
And he got a live person.
Yeah.
And he complained, and they apologized, and they called the paper boy who brought the paper right back, and but that was the way it worked back then. Your newspaper was delivered, you got it, and if it wasn't delivered, you complained and you found out. Nowadays, if you want to complain to the Star Telegram, you call customer service, which is in California.
Get you up the corner.
And then if you call customer service in California and get past the recording to their live person, then they will call back to Fort Worth, used to be when it was delivered stills and porch, and talk to the person delivering and find out what the problem was, and your paper may be delivered the next day.
That's right.
So this is the way things work. So it's a different world. So you're wondering, what am I going to talk about, what you came to hear about? Well, this is what got me interested in reading about the newspapers in the old days. And so kind of rambling on. What we called a paper boy when I was growing up. And if you weren't a paper boy, surely you had friends. One of my best friends had a Star Telegram route and a Fort Worth Press route. And he got up every morning before school and threw his newspapers, and every afternoon. And you go, great kid. He made enough to buy a new car, which cheaper, but it was obviously he was way ahead of the rest of us who were either depending on daddy to buy us a car, or we were with friends. So he did well, but he worked for it. So they were called Newsboys, or Newsies. And they didn't deliver in the suburbs. That's a modern thing. You had to buy your newspaper at a newsstand from a newsboy who locked his papers on the street. The papers were sold by street urchins. My friends, and maybe your friends who sold papers in high school, were the hard-working, upright, responsible, mature high school kid who sold newspapers and said, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, stuff like that. That's much, much later. These are sold by street urchins. Many did not attend school, and some were one jump ahead of the law. Selling newspapers was highly competitive because it was a way a boy could make some money and not have to work in a factory or pick cotton or do that kind of physical labor. But you also, as a paper boy, newsboy, had to protect your street corner against interlopers. Because if you had a good corner or a good place that you sold a lot of papers, you didn't want some other damn kid muscling in on your corner, taking your newspapers. 1913, Fort Worth had about 100 working newsboys. They were employed by the 3 dailies that sold in Fort Worth. The Fort Worth Star-Telegram, formerly the Fort Worth Telegram, the Fort Worth Record, Register, and the Dallas Morning News. The Dallas Morning News had offices in Fort Worth and sold Dallas Morning newspapers in Fort Worth. So with that, C.B. thought wasn't going to do this. Okay, students, I got a question for you. Here's a picture. Here's another picture, obviously. Okay, students, what is different, odd, and unusual about these 2 pictures? What do you think?
Oh, the century.
We're gonna bike, who knows? One's riding the bike, the other's not.
One says Fort Worth, one says Ames.
They're not smart.
They're street urchins.
They're both of them AI created.
Yeah.
I think that's.
And you've got both obviously, they're artificially, intelligently created. And that's because finding a picture of the old street urchins like that, reading a Fort Worth newspaper, doesn't exist. And
Got some Dallas ones.
that one, Amon's Daily, obviously it was never called Amon's Daily. And the happy smiling kid, this bicycle, if there's a picture like that out there, I've never seen it, I don't know anybody else has. So I had a friend who does AI, which puts away ahead of me, who created these for me. So that's what made them special, I think. Back to selling newspapers, where they sold newspapers. The most lucrative locations were not the street corners. Those could be profitable, but the most lucrative locations were saloons, pool halls, and bawdy houses. Okay, what? Bawdy houses. Houses of prostitution. Because while a gentleman was waiting for his appointment upstairs, he had to do something. It was usually a bar. He could read the newspaper, and there was a newsboy there who sold the newspaper. And you go, well, they let boys in those places? Yeah, they also let boys into saloons and in the pool halls. Because there where gentlemen gathered and a little money, you might be able to sell some newspapers. It was very good. Another good location for selling newspapers was working the passenger trains. You had a captive audience. The trains on the way to Oklahoma or East Texas or wherever, you could walk up and down the aisles in the passenger cars and sell newspapers. The problem with that is, if you get on a newspaper that's going far away, you can't just get off and walk back home. And there's a story I came across. In June of 1888, a young fellow named Frank Ryan sold newspapers on the train from Fort Worth up to Oklahoma City. Now think about this. That was a long train ride,
Yeah.
at least 4 or 5 hours, whatever. So if he caught the morning train up there, he had to do what? Catch an evening train back, which made for a very long day of selling newspapers. In the case of Frank Ryan, on the way back in June of 1888, he got wrapped up, caught up in a holdup of the train, and he got shot. And he survived, but that obviously was not what you think of the job description of selling newspapers, getting caught in the train holdup. A hardworking newsboy could make as much as $1.50 a day, which no kid would walk around the block today to make $1.50 in an hour. But $1.50 a day was good money back then. Daily newspapers sold for 2 cents. 2 cents for a daily newspaper. Extra editions were special. Okay, students, I got another question for you. Even though you're Grapevine people, the last extra edition of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, you got your morning, you got your evening, the last extra edition put out with the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Any guesses? Way before 9/11.
Reagan should.
Kennedy.
Kennedy
Really
assassination.
not, no.
Kennedy assassination was the last one put out in some telegram. The boys had to pay about half of the cost of the paper to get their supply. It wasn't a matter of trust, as the boy went and picked up his newspapers, he paid half of what he sold them for, and that's what he got his newspapers for. And obviously, if you were a businessman newspaper boy, you had to try to buy enough papers to where you could sell them, because you couldn't bring leftover papers back and turn them in. There was no refund. If you were a newsboy and bought 100 papers, you didn't sell 100 papers, you ate what you paid for the rest of those newspapers. Many customers, however, flip the boy a nickel and tell them to keep the change. Some boys were the entire support of their families on that $1.50 a day they were taking. Newspaper selling was competitive, but there was also a fraternal feeling among the newsboys, almost a clannishness. Because newsboys didn't admit no girls, no blacks. No girls, no blacks. That was how clannish it was. But there was also an unwritten code of ethics regarding their location. Solidarity against outsiders. Remember what I said about once you had your location staked out, whether it's a pool on the corner or whatever, the ethics of your fellow newsboys were nobody else tried to take your corner. If they did, number one, they're not ethical. Number two, it leads to a fight. One way or the other, whoever wins the fight gets that place. Still, there were newspaper thieves, stealing bundles of newspapers. A boy who picked up his newspapers, or later, there were deliveries to various corners and locations where a wagon would come around. You've seen it in the movies. Bound up newspapers thrown out on the corner. But if the newsboy wasn't there when the papers were delivered bundled up to the corner, somebody might see those newspapers. Because if I'm selling you a newspaper, you're not going to ask where it came from. You want your newspaper. I've got a bundle of papers, I'll sell you a newspaper. You don't know and you don't care whether I stole them or whatever, you just got your newspaper. In 1908, Fort Worth newsboys unionized. That kind of a surprise? They unionized as the Fort Worth Newsboys and Messengers Association. That's because they also included the Western Union Messengers. Back in the days of Western Union, when the telegram came in, and they called the boy messenger and give to him, take it to Dr. So-and-so, or Mr. So-and-so, the mayor, or whatever, and he'd run it, bicycle over to where it was supposed to be delivered. So the newsboys and the Western Union telegraph messengers all formed the same union. They were chartered in December of 1908 by the National Newsboys Association. And the move was blessed by the management of the various major newspapers because it gave them leverage over the boys. Instead of dealing with a whole bunch of individual boys, good, bad, old, young, the management of the newspapers could deal with the union. You got a problem with the delivery boys here, talk to the union leader, get your boys in line, get them straightened out. The president of the association, however, was an adult. Why? Because you may let 8, 10, 12, 15-year-old boys from a union, but you sure don't want them in charge of things. So the president was an adult. First president was a man named Albert C. Williams, who was elected not by the boys, but by the newspaper circulation managers. I mean, there's only so much democracy we're going to allow these kids to have. There's the old Star Telegram building. I don't know how much you can see from where you are, or the light or whatever, but this is back when newspapers were delivered by a wagon. In that building, by the way, the baseball scores were reported. See the little square up there, the box? That was where they posted baseball news, baseball development. And the building right there, if you were looking, you know where Barbara's bookstore is in Fort Worth? If you were standing in Barbara's bookstore looking across the street, this is the building that was across the street. The Fort Worth Star Telegram building. You could go, no, it's on 7th Street. I've been by there. And we moved from here to 7th Street. So that's where that came from.
When did they do that?
When did they move? Well, the Fort Worth Star Telegram building on 7th Street, what we think of there, like the old electric building, built 1921.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Now it belongs to, who's the guy that owns the Texas Rangers and has his own museum in there? Anyway, and then Again, if you grew up in Fort Worth or whatever, the old Fair building on the corner of Throckmorton and 7th Street, the Fair department store eventually went out of business, like most department stores downtown, and the Star Telegram operates out of there. But again, I don't think there's anybody in the offices most of the time. There's not, you can't walk into the building currently and talk to anybody. It's very much people work from home mostly. This right here is Albert C. Williams, again, the first president of the Newsboys Union, and friends many years later, 1933. And they are at Shady Oaks Farm, Amy Carter's Shady Oaks Farm. And then there's somewhere, I'm not sure which one of those guys is Amy Carter, but the one, I think the second one from the end, this one, you're writing, I believe, is Albert C. Williams. Not that it matters, but it's simply the fact that he was around a long time and an important person in Fort Worth history, important enough to be invited by Amy Carter to Shady Oaks Farm, to which you had to be important. Williams was followed by E.B. Travis, who was a YMCA secretary and a judge of the Fort Worth Juvenile Court. So you can see the connection there. Fort Worth Juvenile Court, which was created in 1907, 1908. Also the YMCA, who was secretary of the YMCA. His other job was being juvenile court judge. So still very much an adult-run operation. Union dues of the boys were 15 cents a month. They held their meetings in the courthouse. Later they would move to the First Christian Church, and they, as it was put in the newspaper, made their own rules under the supervision of adults. So boys, you can make your own rules to a certain point, but only to a certain point. Generally, they followed Robert's Rules of Order. And Robert's Rules of Order, for those of us that are adults and part of an organization, and it's sometimes hard to find somebody who knows Robert's Rules of Order. Imagine if you're a bunch of young boys and you're told to follow Robert's Rules of Order, and you kind of make it up as you go along and say, this is what Robert would have done. I think that's probably the way it worked. Their bylaws as a union allowed them to punish members up to and including expelling members from the union. In January 1909, they expelled 4 members for stealing newspapers. And again, if you were kicked out of the union, that not only did you lose your connection to the organization, but your connection to the newspapers, you kind of became persona non grata, to use the fancy word for it. Newsies were well treated and even honored by Fort Worth business and religious leaders, Fort Worth business and community, Fort Worth business and religious community. Newspaper publisher Amon Carter and Temple Bethel rabbi and Texas Jewish Monitor publisher George Fox took special interest in it. This is Amon Carter, and I want you to look at this picture because I love it. This is Carter delivering a motivational speech, which he did quite often, and notice what he's posed in front of.
Himself.
Himself.
Yeah.
I tried to get Larry and Tommy to get a portrait of myself up there behind me, but they didn't come through. This is Rabbi George Fox, and I had a friend, head of the Jewish Archives in Fort Worth, Wallace Wonder, and I said, can you get a picture of George Fox? And she said, well, yes and no. She said, the only picture we have is of him with his wife and son, daughter, son, whatever it is, his wife and kid. I said, well, don't take a picture of him like standing, delivering a sermon or doing something appropriately Jewish. And she said, this is all we got. So this is George Fox. But I think it's important that George Fox, the Jewish rabbi for Fort Worth, Amon Carter, Mr. Amon Carter, were two of the people who promoted, defended, protected, cared about those particular kids. In 1909, the Federation of Women's Clubs turned a basement room in the courthouse into a cozy club room for the boys, which I think is interesting. That's 1909. It's interesting because it's a few years later, the Ku Klux Klan also has a clubhouse in the basement of the courthouse. And apparently the people who managed the courthouse saw some conflict between the Newsboys having their own room down there and the Ku Klux Klan having their meeting hall down there. And if you say, oh, the meeting hall was out on North Main. It's not until 1921, 1922. This is earlier, they had the courthouse. 1910, the Saturday Evening Post, that Saturday Evening Post, hosted a banquet for what they call the little merchants at the Crane Cafe. The boys who came got a free meal and inspirational speeches by adults, and were told when they entered, as long as you conduct yourself wisely, the city will see to it that you're treated royally, as long as you conduct yourself rightly or properly. The Star Telegram and the Elks Club partnered to hold holiday banquets for the Newsboys every Thanksgiving and at Christmas. The featured speakers included Amon Carter, again, Rabbi Fox. The 1910 Thanksgiving banquet honored Charles F. Smith, an elderly blind man who was honored as Fort Worth's oldest living newsboy. He said he'd been a newsboy for 50 years. No, I don't have a picture of him. Hang on to that. The Star Telegram also provided free movie tickets for the boys. During these Thanksgiving Christmas get-togethers, they would get free movie tickets. For some reason, the movie class that usually gave them or provided the free tickets was the Odeon, O-D-E-O-N, which is one of those old early movie houses long before the Worth and the Hollywood and the Palace, way before them. The Star Telegram also provided an all-expense-paid trip to the State Fair every year. And here's what this is. 1933, the boys on the way to the State Fair, compliments of the Fort Worth Star Telegram and Amon Carter, all of them together, and look how many there are. All of them together. I bet you there were some boys that weren't newsboys delivering, they were kind of sneaking in the crowd. But the Star Telegram bought the tickets and took them over there for a day at the State Fair and then brought them back home. That's not a bad deal. Not a bad deal at all. The Newsboys Union was a big success by any measure. It taught rudimentary business skills and the principles of democracy. The boys also formed their own baseball team. They also formed their own marching band. So if you think it wasn't an honor and a sign of respect to be a newsboy, even if there were urchins, they were very proud of themselves and their organization. And boys came to town from elsewhere in the state just to become a newsboy in Fort Worth. 1913, Fort Worth police took two 12-year-old boys into custody at the train station. The boys explained to the police they had run away from home to come to Fort Worth and sell newspapers. The police took them to the station, contacted their parents, and had them come bring the train in and had them take them home. Being a newsie was a proud time in many boys' lives. 1913, a Pioneer Newsboys Association was created, which was all those old newsboys that were years ago newsboys, and now they were older, established, hopefully successful businessmen. They formed a Pioneer Newsboys organization. Members included George Mulkey, who'd been Fort Worth Police Commissioner and very important in the Methodist Church. There was at one time Mulkey Memorial Methodist Church, one of the main churches in Fort Worth many years ago. And furniture store icons were also part of the group, Walter and David Poindexter. And again, if you go back in Fort Worth history, it used to be one of the finest furniture stores in Fort Worth was Poindexter's. And it wasn't like Walmart furniture, it was high-class furniture. The Poindexter brothers had started out, they said, as newsboys. And the Star Telegram ran a column asking its readers, quote, "Were you ever in Newsy? Tell us your story." And they got a number of reports that they printed in the newspaper. It's hard to imagine that happening today with any old newspaper, but that happened then. Fort Worth's Bob Smith Lewis started out during World War II delivering Star Telegrams to mansions on Broad Avenue, where Amon Carter and some others lived. Carter greeted the boy Lewis every morning, and Smith went on to become an honored Texas radio personality. If you ever listened to radio a long time ago, The Sound of Texas was Bob Smith Lewis. That was his program, and he got his start delivering newspapers, as he said, to Amon Carter and other rich kids. And Lewis credited his boyhood paper route with pointing him toward a career in journalism. But it wasn't always a moment to be cherished fondly. In 1922, a Fort Worth press carrier was delivering newspapers, delivering presses in the River Press section of Fort Worth, very exclusive section of Fort Worth. And he knocked on the door of the mansion of W.C. Summers, who was the general manager of either Swift or Armour. And the boy was going to deliver a complimentary newspaper by sticking near the door and hope that then Summers would read the paper and subscribe, and the boy would get another subscriber. Instead, W.C. Summers heard somebody at his front door pulled out a pistol and shot the kid.
Oh, no.
Thought he was being robbed. Said he was looking for a burglar, and he shot him. Summers was charged with assault, and Allen's family sued. The boy's family sued. It was settled out of court, no surprise, for $75,000 in damages for a boy who, quote, would always be a cripple. Plus, I love this part, another $28,000 for his father. Think about that. "1932 Thanksgiving dinner was a landmark event in the history of the Newsboys organization. It was sponsored by the Elks Club." Oops, wrong way. This is here, I think this is a picture that one of y'all put in the newsletter maybe, but it's that 1932 Thanksgiving dinner at the Elks Club, attended by beardless boys, great bearded former Newsboys, and civic leaders. And you can tell, if you can see the picture, that probably this is the best meal these boys saw, these boys had ever. Certainly for the year. Because again, still they're mostly street urchins, and not your good high school middle class kid. Among the older attendees at this 1932 dinner was 60-ish E.H. McKee, who, remember, he had once sold papers at 7th and Main. And another member there, another boy there, was 11-year-old Walter Wood, who had to stand up on a chair to be seen to thank their benefactors. Publisher Eamon Carter delivered the evening's after-dinner speech, and he passed out crisp $1 bills to all the boys. Future subscribers. This is Eamon Carter's motivational speech. Listen up. "Boys, you know the value of money, how to make it, how to spend it. You are boys who in the future will be running the business of this country, and you're getting a good education for it now. Business success requires energy, ambition, and hard work. Well, you're learning that to get ahead of your competitors, you have to reach the desirable corner first. The man first on the spot, and who knows what to do after he gets there, is the one who succeeds." Don't you remember your 12-year-old boy in the audience's heartbeat? At least his heartbeat rapidly when he got the dollar bill, the crisp dollar bill. For publisher Eamon Carter, the newspaper, Newsboys, whatever, the whole newspaper was a family business. He even put, I love this, he even put Eamon Carter Jr. to work selling papers.
Huh.
Now, this is Eamon Carter Jr., and I'm willing to bet, I don't think Eamon Carter Jr. was out selling newspapers every day. I think this was a publicity shot by Dad to make a point. And Eamon Carter also put his daughter to work. This is Ruth Carter, later Stevenson, I think, selling newspapers. And I guarantee you, she wasn't standing on a corner every day selling newspapers. But it was good advertising for the Carter family, that the newspaper business was their business, and for all of them. Time and progress eventually passed the Newsies by. Child labor laws severely restricted their traditional arrangement with the newspapers. No more union. When child labor laws came in the 1930s, the idea of 9, 10, 12-year-old boys forming a union and getting paid and working and having a contract, that all went out the window. So if you want to argue for or against child labor laws, that's an argument one way or the other, I guess. The middle-class suburbs also, in the decades to come, that became the principal market for selling newspapers, delivered in the early mornings and evenings before and after school by polite newsboys. As late as the 1940s, downtown papers were still delivered by horse-drawn wagon. This delivery wagon with this fella, I don't remember his name, but he delivered papers to Sutherland for years in this horse-drawn wagon. This is a picture taken in the 1940s. You go, 1940s. Now, how much was it historical, nostalgic, whatever, but this was taken where he picked up his newspapers every day and drove the wagon around delivering. They became newspapers, newsboys, an object of nostalgia. 1992, oh, there he is again, the Hollywood Theater in front of the old Star Telegram building. Same fella. And again, I don't remember his name, I've got it written somewhere, but he did this for years and years and years. He didn't sell the newspaper, he picked them up and delivered them to the stores, the places, the train station where they were to be sold by newsboys. Another artificially intelligent picture. Your newsboy at work today, right? Ultimately, newsboys went with elevator operators and gas station attendants. When was the last time you pulled into a gas station and somebody rushed out and checked your oil and cleaned their windshield and gassed up your car? They were replaced by online delivery of the news, no more morning newspapers on your doorstep or in the bushes. This picture, remembering the Newsies today is a mixture of honoring them and nostalgia. Two Fort Worth artists commemorated the boys. This is Felisa Owens, who did a 1958 painting, Star Telegram boys. And my friend Scott Barker, who knows all about Fort Worth art, provided me with the pictures. I had never heard of Felisa Owens, didn't know she did a painting called the Star Telegram boys. I have no idea where the painting is, what happened to it. But there she is, posing with her newspaper, Star Telegram Boys in 1958. Mrs. Jackson Douglas, 1971, did an oil painting titled simply Monroe. And that is, I believe, Monroe. It was a posthumous, when she was working on it, because it was a posthumous portrait of Monroe Odom, who sold newspapers for years in front of the Worth Hotel. Remember the Worth Theater, Worth Hotel? He saw that was his spot for years and years to sell them. The amazing story, but true, the night Mrs. Douglas completed her painting of Monroe Odom, he died that same night. This is a photo of Odom in 1954, where he was known as one of the stalwarts, one of the veterans of the newspaper selling. The painting, Simply Monroe, won the Women's Club Art Department show in 1972. The last thing, Disney. Remember a movie that Disney made in 1992? Newsies was the name of it. Newsboys on Broadway, the Newsies, a Broadway musical. Musical did pretty well. This is back before, it's back when Walt Disney was looking for subjects before they discovered Moana and Aladdin and The Littlest Mermaid and all that kind of stuff to make a lot of money. They were still searching for the subject that would catch fire and sell a gazillion tickets. The Newsies on Broadway musical did okay, but it was turned into a movie. And if you remember it all, you might have seen the movie. It only comes up now if you order it on late night television streaming. It's not a big movie, but I think, don't quote me, I think that the movie was directed by Ron Howard. And don't quote me on that, but I think it was directed by Ron Howard. The movie took the Broadway musical and turned it into a movie, which I'll say didn't do too well, just like you don't see it now in the regular whatever. But this is.
That's it.
This is it. So that's the story of the old Newsboys and what they did and how they did it, and a lot of pride. So if you have any questions, I will answer the questions or not, as the case may be.
Were you a newsboy?
No. I was either too lazy to get up that early in the morning or not smart enough to realize how much money I could make because I didn't do it. Like I said, I had a friend, he was a year ahead of me at Pascal, and he did it for several years, enough to buy a car and his own clothes. His mother and he lived alone, didn't have a lot of money. He bought nice clothes, a car, kept the car going, everything on his newspaper route. But he also, every morning before school and every day after school, he was delivering newspapers.
I
What
was
else?
really surprised to learn from you that they were responsible for paying for those papers. I'm surprised.
In the early years. Now later on, I'm not sure what it was, by the time our friend Jim was doing it in 1960s. But in the early years, you bought your newspapers. If you sold it for 2 cents, you paid a cent for a newspaper. And whatever you didn't sell, you gave away, threw away, or put in the birdcage, I guess.
I mean, that's how it works, but I didn't realize those kids had to do that. Wow.
It was a lot of pride, but also a lot of responsibility, which is why even Carter and others could talk about how much it was building business entrepreneurial values and democratic values and all that kind of good stuff. Other questions? Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I was going to make a comment. You said earlier about the papers are now delivered through mail 3 days a week, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. And the Wednesday has some of the stuff from Monday and Tuesday, and the Friday one has some from but the one you get on the mail on Saturday is the Sunday paper.
Sunday paper. If you still read the Star Telegram, which I still take the Sunday paper and I take it and eat breakfast on a Sunday morning and I take it with me. Talking about getting stares. This old guy sitting over here with all this paper in front of him. What's he doing? What's he doing? He must be some kind of pervert or something. But the Star Telegram, for better or for worse, gets most of it. There's only about 2 people who are regular full-time columnists, Bud Kennedy and Mac Engel, I think. And other than that, 99% of the Star Telegram stories are wire, online stories. And then beyond that, it's the stories about so-and-so murdered, so-and-so we had a car wreck, and whatever, this kind of stuff. It's not the kind of stories that you would have read years ago, back when you had multiple columnists writing multiple columns in the newspaper. Anything else? Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
My husband grew up in Fort Worth, and he threw something called the Shopper.
Yeah.
Now, what exactly was that? Was that like an ads?
Shopper was all ads. My father bought the shoppers so he could, my father never bought anything new. And so he bought the shopper so he could see what was for sale and then buy it. But that's why you bought the shopper. And obviously that doesn't around anymore because it's all done online, whatever. But that's how I got my bicycle that he bought me in the 3rd grade, was he found somebody selling a Hercules bike cheap. And I got my bicycle in the 3rd grade. That's what the shopper was. Yeah. Yes, sir.
My grandfather, like many rural families, he would farm in the morning and come home, sleep, and then go back out and farm. And about 5 o'clock in the evening, he'd head to town along with a bunch of other farmers and ranchers. They'd all meet at the local drugstore for coffee. And he'd get his evening paper there. And I asked him, why don't you get the morning paper? He said, well, the morning paper, the news is all a day old. You get the evening paper, you get up-to-date news in it. And so the evening paper was pretty popular in farming communities.
That whole thing of printing newspapers, I mean, in recent years, before they went to this 3 papers and delivered by the mailbox and everything else digital, the last several years, the Star Telegram was printed by the Dallas Morning News print facility. And I thought that was kind of, I was going to use the word humiliating if Eamon Carter was looking down on us. But anyway, yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, do you know what the Star Telegram at the height of their print run or the subscription rate was?
Back in that day, it was
Quarter.
That's a little bit about it. Subscription, good question. Don't remember. If you bought one paper, it's the early 20th century, maybe up through 1915, whatever, 2 cents for a newspaper. Don't know what if you subscribe to it. Good question.
But how many did they sell? How many did they print each day?
I'm not sure about that either.
Yeah.
I didn't find that out. The question was how many did they print each day? I'm sure it was set up as a business. And Eamon Carter doesn't take over the whole newspaper until really the 1920s, when he becomes editor, publisher, chief cook and bottle washer. He started working for the newspaper, the Telegram, back in 1905 or 1906, selling advertising. And then when the Star and the Telegram combined in 1909 to become the Star Telegram, he became an editor, assistant editor, anyway, went from there. Short question, long answer. Yes, yes, ma'am.
My favorite copy of the Fort Worth Star Telegram is December 30th, 1932. And it's been about 15 years ago, I got a phone call from one of my customers who said, Debbie, I have found the Fort Worth Star Telegram that says robber tricks farmer in helping in escape. And it was the whole story about the robbery of the Grapevine Home Bank. It was 12 original pages of the newspaper, and it was $14.95 on eBay.
On eBay?
Yeah.
On eBay. And it documented the whole story, and it was specific to us because we own that building. And so all of a sudden, we had what the robbers were telling the farmers and the bankers, and their whole conversation of how the bank was robbed. And so when I got it, I called the Fort Worth Star Telegram and I asked him, I said, what can I do with this? And they said, you can never sell it. You can never make any money off of it, but you can copy it and give it away. So I did. The gun that was used to rob the bank, what came off of Main Street on December 30th, 1932. And it was donated to City Hall. So if you go upstairs to City Hall and hang a left right up there, there's a copy.
Grapevine City Hall, right?
Grapevine, There's a copy of the article. I had it copied and framed right beside the gun that was used to trap one of the robbers.
Good for you.
So the whole story of all that, the story, we knew we'd been robbed, but I didn't know details at all like it is. And in this book that was given away tonight, there's a copy of the Fort Worth Star Telegram in that book. That if you get a magnifying glass, you can still read it.
Yes, I did it, Mike.
It's that good.
See what we're missing? You can't get the same kind of exciting stuff by reading your damn smartphone.
No.
It's got to be newspaper. I need to turn it back over to the people, the man, and if you have any questions, I'll be back. And thank you all very much.